There's something stirring beneath the surface of our societies, a low, restless murmur that grows a little louder every year. It's hard to name, harder still to trace, but it's there, pulsing like a hidden current under all the daily noise. It's a quiet, uneasy realization that most of us, from Detroit to Delhi, from Sao Paulo to Seoul, are all in the same boat. Not metaphorically, literally, tossed about by the same economic storms, the same rigged games, the same uneasy sense that no matter how hard we row, someone else controls the tides. We've long measured ourselves in tribes and nations, colors and creeds. We've wrapped ourselves in flags, told stories about destiny and divine favor, sworn loyalty to people we'll never meet, simply because they were born inside the same invisible lines on a map. But beneath all that, something new, something profoundly simple, is starting to dawn on us. It's not just an economic slogan anymore, not just the 99% scrawled on cardboard outside a bank tower. It's the faint beginning of a global psychological shift, a fragile, flickering awareness that cuts deeper than politics or party labels, an awareness that we are the 99%, not just in raw numbers, though we are overwhelmingly many, but in our shared needs, in our common vulnerabilities, in the vast, unrealized possibility that if we ever truly recognize each other as equally human, equally deserving, we might just change everything. Because for all our differences, most of us wake up with the same quiet hopes: to keep our families safe, to find some dignity in our work, to breathe air that doesn't poison us, to drink water that doesn't make us sick, to watch our children grow up without the constant gnawing fear that the floor might give way. And that simple recognition that we are bound by the same human stakes is a tiny spark of something enormous, a new kind of awareness, still fragile, still searching for language. But if it grows, it could become the most powerful force on Earth. For most of human history, our loyalties were small, intensely local, intensely personal. Our world was defined by family, by tribe, by clan. These were the circles where trust could grow, where safety was found, where the rules were understood. Outside those circles, strangers were often enemies. Anyone beyond the familiar faces was competition for scarce resources, food, water, shelter, or worse, a threat to survival itself. Our minds and hearts evolved for that world. We became experts in reading faces, in interpreting subtle signals of trust and danger within small groups. But this meant suspicion toward anyone who didn't belong. And that suspicion often turned into hostility. Then, over thousands of years, the scale of human societies expanded dramatically. Empires rose and fell, regions spread, nations formed. Suddenly, identities grew beyond the tribe, to millions under a single banner. Shared language, shared ritual, shared stories became the glue that held vast, diverse populations together. We created myths and symbols, flags, anthems, national heroes, that inspired us to feel loyalty to strangers we'd never met. We became willing to live and even die for one of us, even if that us stretched across continents. This expansion of identity was a profound leap forward. It allowed cooperation on scales unimaginable before. It built civilizations, erected great cities, enabled trade networks that spanned the globe. But it also entrenched new divisions. Borders on maps became fences between people. The us versus them mentality persisted, now magnified on the scale of nations. Wars were fought over these invisible lines. Hatred hardened around language, religion, skin color, and culture. Then came industrialization, a transformation unlike any before. It reshaped economies, societies, and daily life. Machines replaced muscle. Cities exploded in size. And with this upheaval, a new form of identity began to emerge: class consciousness. Workers, once peasants tied to land and lord, now found themselves in factories and mines. They were no longer subjects of kings, but laborers creating vast wealth. Slowly, they realized they were the true engines of the economy. Yet the owners, the industrialists, reaped the lion's share of the rewards. This awareness seeded ideas of solidarity among the working class. It gave rise to movements and struggles for rights, fair wages, and dignity. Yet, through all these changes, one thing remained constant: division was the rule. If it wasn't the village pitted against the neighboring tribe, it was one nation against another. If not the rich against the poor within a city, it was the workers in one country wary of migrants from another. These fault lines shifted shape but never disappeared. They kept the many distracted, fractured, and sometimes even fighting each other, while the structures of power stayed firmly in place. Then, something changed. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, uneven awakening, sparked by forces no single person controlled, but many would come to feel. Globalization, the weaving together of economies, cultures, and communications networks, shrank the world into something new and strange. What happened in one corner of the planet echoed across oceans and continents. Suddenly, the economic shock in the United States rippled through Iceland's fishing communities and sent tremors to factory workers in Malaysia. The world was connected, but the benefits of that connection were deeply uneven. The internet, that vast digital web, became a nervous system for this new global age. Voices once isolated could find each other across borders. Stories of hardship, injustice, and resilience spread faster than ever before. The tools for mass organizing and awareness were no longer confined to governments or elites. They were in the hands of the many. Then came the crisis of 2008, a financial earthquake that collapsed economies and livelihoods in its wake. Homeowners in Nevada lost their homes as banks bailed themselves out. Young people around the world faced shattered job markets and futures clouded by uncertainty. And in that shared moment of crisis, a phrase emerged from the streets: "We are the 99%. It was simple, yet revolutionary. A clear-eyed indictment of a system rigged in favor of a tiny few, who hoarded unimaginable wealth, while the vast majority struggled just to get by. But the 99% wasn't just a statistic. It was a symbol, a rallying cry, a banner under which many could unite. Yet, beneath the numbers and politics, something more profound began to flicker. A spark of global empathy, fragile and flickering but unmistakable. For the first time in a long time, people from diverse corners of the globe glimpsed a shared human reality. We are the same in our struggles. Our fights are more alike than different. The barriers we perceive, language, nationality, ideology, are smaller than the real divide. The true separation is between the many and the few. This awakening isn't complete. It faces resistance and skepticism. But it marks a shift towards seeing ourselves as part of a broader whole, a collective consciousness, shaped not just by shared economics, but by shared hopes, fears, and the simple fact that our futures are intertwined. Because if the 99% ever truly grasped that unity, the world would change overnight. Not in some distant, slow revolution. No, the change would ripple instantly, toppling the carefully maintained illusion and structures that keep our societies locked in place. For centuries, the old systems of power have relied on division as their greatest tool. They don't just tolerate our differences, they weaponize them. Division by race, by nation, by religion, by party color, by anything that can fragment solidarity and redirect our anger inward instead of upward. The left versus right, the purple versus puce. These are not just political rivalries or aesthetic choices. They are carefully engineered fault lines, drilled deep into our social fabric to keep us busy fighting each other, so that we never pause long enough to look together at who's actually writing the rules. Who benefits from the division? Who profits while the rest of us struggle? A true 99% consciousness is a threat to that status quo. It's dangerous because it refuses to play by the old rules. It asks uncomfortable questions no amount of spin or distraction can ever fully answer. Why do billionaires exist in a world where millions sleep in doorways, hungry and desperate? Why does technology, capable of producing abundance beyond any prior imagination, get deliberately throttled, kept behind paywalls and patents, while basic needs remain out of reach for so many? Why do we fight over scraps? Scraps of income, scraps of dignity, scraps of security. Instead of imagining and building a world where no one fears eviction, where medical cares are right, where hunger is a relic of the past. This consciousness breaks the spell. It exposes the lie that scarcity is natural and inevitable. It reveals the truth that scarcity is a choice, a system designed to protect privilege, not to protect people. And when people realize this, when the vast majority begin to see through the smoke and mirrors, the existing power structures lose their grip. The language of division starts to sound hollow. The incentives to hoard wealth and block change begin to crumble under the weight of collective awareness. That's why the powers that be expend so much effort to keep the 99% divided, distracted, and doubting each other. Because if we ever truly come together in shared purpose and understanding, well, the world as we know it would have to change. If this consciousness matures, if it spreads beyond slogans and protests into a lived collective awareness, it could ignite a new kind of solidarity, one that breaks free from the old boundaries of tribe, nation, religion, or party affiliation. A solidarity rooted not just in abstract ideology or imposed identity, but in the undeniable fact that we all bleed the same, dream the same, fear the same. It's a solidarity built on our shared humanity, the universal desire to care about our children, to see them grow up safe and free, the wish to age with dignity, to look back on a life lived with purpose and respect, the yearning to live without the relentless pressure of economic anxiety, the fear that one job loss, one illness, one accident could undo everything. This isn't a utopian fantasy. It's the groundwork for a new social contract, one grounded in empathy and fairness. As this consciousness grows, it could build unstoppable pressure for a new economic model, one that no longer treats housing, healthcare, food, education, and clean air as luxuries or as privileges to be won or lost in a lottery of birth or wealth, but as basic rights guaranteed to every person, simply because we are human. Imagine a world where no one is forced to choose between medicine and rent, where every child has access to nourishing food and quality education, where breathing clean air and drinking safe water are non-negotiable standards, not afterthoughts. Such a model would redefine prosperity, shifting the measure from endless consumption and profit to well-being and security for all. Beyond economics, this consciousness could finally push humanity to face the climate crisis with the urgency it demands. Because once you see yourself as part of the 99%, not just of one country, but as an inhabitant of Earth itself, the idea of poisoning our shared home for the profit of a tiny elite becomes not only immoral, but utterly irrational. It becomes clear that our fates are intertwined, that a wildfire in the Amazon, or drought in Africa, a flood in Bangladesh, and a heat wave in Europe are not distant tragedies, but interconnected threads in the tapestry of our collective future. With this awareness, the possibility arises for coordinated global action on a scale never seen before, for cooperation that transcends borders and short-term interests, for policies and initiatives that protect the planet while lifting humanity together. In short, the growth of the 99% consciousness could usher in a new era, one defined by solidarity, justice, and stewardship. An era where the powerful few no longer dictate terms, and where the vast majority reclaim the world as their own. But this awakening is fragile. Like a delicate seedling pushing through cracked concrete, it can easily be crushed, overshadowed, or diverted. It's vulnerable, especially to the forces that have long shaped human societies: fear, manipulation, and division. The machinery designed to keep us apart is vast and deeply entrenched. It operates relentlessly through media, politics, social networks, and culture. It spins stories that direct our frustration toward convenient scapegoats: the immigrant crossing the border, the person receiving government aid, the neighbor who votes differently or holds different beliefs. It thrives by stoking suspicion and hatred between groups who otherwise share the same struggles and dreams. This machinery is not accidental. It's intentional. The purpose is to fragment the 99%, to pit us against each other in a zero-sum game of blame and mistrust. So long as we are distracted by these divisions, we never come together long enough to challenge the real architects of inequality, the ones who profit from keeping us divided. Yet, beyond these external forces lies an even deeper challenge, a psychological hurdle rooted in hope and survival. Many among the 99% still hold on to a powerful dream: the hope of becoming part of the 1%. The promise that if we work harder, play by the rules, or navigate a system just right, we might climb the ladder into privilege and security. This dream creates loyalty to a system stacked overwhelmingly against them. It convinces people to defend the very structures that exploit them, to believe the ladder is real, even when it's rigged, and to fear losing the crumbs they've managed to grab. This internal tension between shared struggle and individual aspiration makes collective unity difficult. It fuels competition among peers and undermines trust. It blurs the line between oppressor and oppressed, because the oppressed sometimes aspire to be the oppressors. Together, these external and internal obstacles form a powerful barrier to the full flowering of the 99% consciousness. But recognizing these challenges is the first step toward overcoming them. Understanding how fear, division, and false hopes are used against us can help us build stronger bonds, clearer narratives, and more resilient movements. Because the awakening might be fragile, but it's not impossible. And it's already happening in quiet moments, bold protests, and growing conversations around the world. So the question becomes, can we nurture this 99% consciousness into something more durable? Something that doesn't flicker and fade like a passing protest chant or a viral hashtag, but lives and breathes in the fabric of our everyday lives? Can we craft stories, build institutions, and forge movements that transform this idea from a slogan into a powerful, lasting reality? One that shapes how we organize our communities, how we run our economies, and relate to each other across all boundaries. It means more than just politics or policy. It means changing the stories we tell ourselves and our children about who we are and what we owe one another. Can we teach new generations to look at the person across the street, the classmate, the neighbor, not as a competitor or threat, but as a fellow traveler on this shared journey? Someone with hopes and fears, joys and pains, as real and urgent as our own. This shift calls for imagination and courage, for education that goes beyond facts and figures, reaching into empathy and understanding, for community building that reaches across lines of race, class, nationality, and creed, for movements that listen as much as they speak, that unite around shared humanity instead of imposed differences. Because if we can do this, if we can nurture the 99% consciousness into something living and lasting, then we might finally break free from the ancient logic that has held humanity in its grip for millennia. The logic of division, suspicion, and scarcity. The belief that there isn't enough for all of us, and that we must fight to survive. Instead, we could write a new story for ourselves and for the generations to come. A story about what it truly means to live together on this little blue planet. Not as isolated tribes or competing factions, but as a single community bound by shared destiny and shared responsibility. A world where the 99% stops seeing itself as powerless victims and begins to act as the overwhelming majority it truly is, capable of shaping the systems, the culture, and the future we want to live in. This is not an easy path. It will require patience and persistence, failures and setbacks. But every step forward is a reclaiming of our power as the people united by more than just circumstance, a people united by choice. This 99% consciousness remains fragile, still in its infancy, in a half-formed dream hovering on the edge of full bloom. It's not yet a roaring flame, but a flickering candlelight, vulnerable to the winds of distraction and fear. Yet it is there, in the chanting crowds who rise up in cities from Santiago to Cairo, their voices carrying through streets and squares, demanding dignity and justice. In the countless mutual aid groups that emerged quietly during the pandemic, neighbors reaching out to neighbors, not out of obligation, but out of a shared sense of humanity and care. In the small, often unseen moments, a hand offered to someone down on their luck, a conversation that breaks through prejudice, a simple act of kindness between strangers. It's in these acts and in these spaces that the seed of a new consciousness takes root. In every quiet moment, when someone asks themselves, why, in an age of staggering technological progress and unimaginable wealth, do so many still live in hunger, in fear, in neglect? Why is abundance reserved for so few, while billions are left behind? That wondering, raw, uneasy, persistent, is where it all starts. Not in grand declarations, but in the gentle stirring of conscience, in the refusal to accept the world as it is without asking how it could be different. And maybe, just maybe, it's through this shared growing awareness, this collective questioning, that we begin to wake up. Not as isolated individuals, but as a people bound together by common hopes and shared challenges. A people who realize that change doesn't come from waiting for permission, nor from power handed down, but from the simple, radical act of recognizing each other's humanity and acting on that recognition. The road ahead is uncertain, and the challenges immense. But in this fragile, flickering consciousness lies the possibility of a new beginning. A beginning where the 99% remember its strength, its voice, and its shared destiny. Together.